I don't know about all of you, but after that project and learning how to write a DBQ, I am ready for a traditional, regular, old school kind of class. And if you don't feel like I do, that's tough, and I'm sorry. But if you do feel like I do, that's what you're getting today. And at this point in our story, the Revolutionary War is over, and now what? So if you were absent from class, I started class with 3 questions, okay? Question number 1 is, pretend you're 18 years old and you're about to leave Clarenceville and move into the adult world. What of your childhood and your upbringing are you going to keep, and what are you going to get rid of? That's one of the cool parts of being an adult. You can go through that thinking exercise and go, I'm going to keep that, I'm going to discard that. Little evidence to the point, that's me 30-something years ago with a couple of my buddies. I was actually 17 when I graduated, but believe me, I was chomping at the bit to get out and do my own thing. But like a lot of young people, I made my mistakes, okay? So that kind of parallels what America's story is, okay? So that was the opening question, made it personal. Now I scaled it to a more historical level. So if you were a patriot, colonist in 1784, what about English rule would you want to keep, and what aspects of English rule would you want to get rid of? This is a little more historical because the British were not all bad, okay? However, they were problematic enough to have a war with them. So walking in their shoes, what would you keep and what would you discard? And then the third opening question is a little shorter, as you can see. What is required to become a nation? Okay, so those are the 3 opening questions. And to break down these opening questions, this whole transition to adulthood, I've asked this question of hundreds of young people in my time, and it ranges from people who are legitimately saying, my childhood's been beautiful. I had wonderful parents. I've had a wonderful upbringing. I want to give my children the same. I've had the reverse of saying, you know, my childhood's been a horror show. I'm going to do the opposite of what I was raised. Most people are in between. Most people are saying, you know, one parent did this cool, one parent did not, or that sort of thing. Now, I will say as the old guy, this isn't really history per se, but believe me, if you do choose to have children, and every time you give your children a better situation than you had, it is tremendously healing and redeeming for those of you who had less than pleasant childhoods. Okay, that's a little more of a personal level, but transitioning more to historical scale, the big changes, monarchy to republic, a fundamental change in how we run ourselves. And then you got to ask yourself, how did America figure out how to become a player in the world? Because they're new to the world. I almost liken it to a first-year teacher, and I'm the old teacher in the building. I almost want to wait a year or two to see who they are and, you know, where they fit in. Some of those first-year teachers are great and they become colleagues and friends, and others of them are disasters. And I'm like, okay, I think the world was doing that with America, saying, hey, do you got it, or do you not have it? Okay, and then how are you going to make your living? How will you defend yourself? These are questions you ask on a personal level and on a nation level. And then the freedom to make your own choices compared to being told what to do by Britain. That was a big transition. So those are the breakdowns of the first 2 questions. Now the third question is a little more involved. What is required to make a nation? Now historians will argue about what is required. This is my list. You can critique it. But to make a nation, you need to have physical geographic location and borders like this. You have to have the unity of the people, and a revolution. Obviously, the Revolutionary War gave us these 2 things. Iconography and symbols like flags and eagles and this sort of thing. Propaganda to promote national interest. Here's a propaganda poster to get people on board in the revolution. Creating common values, patriotism, national self-identity, language. Noah Webster created a different English dictionary. And by the way, to this day, American English has a lot of differences than British English. For example, a simple one, the letter Z, we call it Z, they call it Z, that sort of thing. And then you have to create the other. You have to create kind of a common enemy to unite people. And then music. Music promotes nationalism. Here's people singing patriotic songs back in the day. And then you have to have an educational system that promotes the value of the nations. So that's my list. So those are the breakdowns of the first 3 questions. And then we were going to move into the content. Okay, now the content, I want to start off with this point. America is a baby. We're an infant. We have to figure it out, okay? And it is hard to start out. Believe me, when you're 18, 19 years old, trying to get on your feet, it's challenging. It was no different for America, okay? So let's start at the root of, you know, the American ethos. Now, my Latin is not perfect, so if you're really good at Latin and you want to make fun of the way I pronounced it, it's okay. I don't claim to be a Latin teacher. But this is on a $1 bill. You've seen this before. If you're a conspiracy theorist or Illuminati person, I am the wrong guy to talk to. I don't have any conspiracy theories that I agree with, so talk to somebody else. Get that out of the way. So the two mottos, Inuit Coeptus. He favors our undertakings. That's our motto, saying God is on board with what we did. You know, he's cool with what we did. And then the other one, Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new order for the ages, which is a very bold motto saying we're creating something brand new and it's going to last a long time. This is our starting point. And I think this Thomas Paine quote is very apropos to the American way of thought at the time, where he said, we have it in our power to begin the world over again. We are creating a new world of a republic and popular sovereignty and equality and these foundations of American thought. Okay. Now, from your book, these are some of those challenges that I was talking about when starting out. And the Newburgh conspiracy. Now, the Newburgh conspiracy was a plot hatched in 1783 near the end of the American Revolutionary War, resulting from the fact that many of the officers and men of the Continental Army had not received pay for many years. The new nation under the Articles of Confederation was in financial crisis. Now, through the Newburgh conspiracy, which was engineered by Alexander Hamilton and Robert Morris, the army, whose pay was overdue, threatened to force the states into surrendering more power to the national government. So we had some trouble right out of the gates. And this Newburgh conspiracy, again, you've heard me say this 100 times. You mess with people's money, you mess with their emotions. Add this to the list. So we had to overcome this challenge right out of the gates, okay? And then we have another challenge, SHAY'S Rebellion. This was an armed movement of debt-ridden farmers in western Massachusetts in the winter of 1786 and 1787 who objected to the state's effort to tax them to pay off the Revolutionary War debt. Again, when you tax people too much, or people feel they are being taxed and not getting their money's worth, if you will, people get upset. They got upset in 1786. They get upset today. That does not change. You mess with people's money, you mess with their emotions. Okay, now the Articles of Confederation, another challenge, another mistake. This was our first attempt to run ourselves. It did not work. Now, our second attempt, the Constitution, worked beautifully, which is a beautiful idea of saying, hey, you make mistakes, you learn from our mistakes. But at this juncture, the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union was an agreement among the 13 original states of the U.S., and it served as the first frame of government. It was approved after much debate. It did not work. Okay, so we were operating with a flawed governmental system, which was a big part of our challenges. But we did, like I said, it's coming up. We learned about the Constitution. Second attempt to run ourselves. Good job, America. Okay, now this map on 166 is really an important map to show what's going on. And it's probably a little easier to see it in your book. But this is a huge tract of land that the King's Proclamation line had reserved for Indian tribes before the Revolution became part of the United States in 1783. Now, different original states claimed this land, and one of the first duties of Congress was to sort out these conflicting claims. Now, after 1783, nobody in the government spoke out for the rights of American Indians, whose land, was there. So you can see this line of the colonies, and this was supposed to be reserved for American Indians, but people started staking a claim. And if you know the story, the future story, manifest destiny, move west, young man, from sea to shining sea, and eventually we go from this east coast to all the way to the Pacific Ocean, but we'll get into that story at a later date. Another part of your book that they focused on was the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Now, this was legislation passed by the Congress under the Articles of Confederation that provided for public schools. That is probably the best thing in our Articles of Confederation time. Okay, the fact that we said education is important, that everybody should have access to it, that's a revolutionary, and I would argue a very positive idea. Bear in mind my bias as a public school teacher, right? So anyway, it also authorized the sale of government land and prohibited slavery in the Northwest Territory, and you can read the writing on the wall of what that will eventually turn into, this division between slave state and non-slave state. That's for another day as well. And then part of this Northwest Territory was this grid system that reinforces my point. So when you, and you can see our own states here, okay, so these Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, what we call the Midwest today, what they would do is they would divide the territory into these sections, okay? Now, 35 of these sections would be sold or available to settlers, but one would be reserved for public school. And that is a wonderful, positive idea. And so that was, I would argue, the Northwest Territories was a well thought out policy at the time, okay? So anyway, that ends the content. And in terms of the assessment today, there's no formal writing or anything. Your participation in the notes you turn in is it. Figure you all could use a little break after I've beaten you up with the DBQ the last couple days. So anyway, thank you for watching.